What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, so unfortunately most of the things that I know that are very, very funny are probably not appropriate for here. But a few of the stories that we felt we could share. One of them was in the mid-40s, my father and Eric got a job at the Hoover plant in the summer. Largely, I'm sure, because Eric's father, Dave, was the head of maintenance there. One day, Dave got a call from Mr. Stevens, who was the head of Hoover, and he was looking at his office and saw some bums sleeping behind the Hoover sign, and he wanted Dave to get down there right away and shoo them off. And although this was not out of the ordinary, because it was a notorious place for people to drink and sleep it off, before he even hung up the phone and headed out there, Dave was quite sure that those were not winos, but they were two of the bums he had hired for the summer. On another occasion, my father went over to Eric's house to wait for him because he was on his way back from the license bureau, and he was hoping to see that perhaps he had gotten his license, which was going to be quite a big deal to both of them, I'm sure, so they could be out and about in a larger way. As he was sitting on the lawn, Eric and his dad pulled into the driveway, and the smell of success was in the air. Yeah. And as Eric approached the garage, the smooth technique that would mark his later driving was yet defined, and he hit the gas instead of the brake. After the car smashed through the garage door, bringing the door down on its hinges, Eric's dad just quietly left the car. My father, who was, as they say, on the lawn, was just rolling in hysteria at what had just occurred. But he remembered that Dave just looked over at him and gave him a smile, kind of saying, like, "That's my boy," and he headed into the house. And my dad always felt that what a great father for Eric to have, and what a great grandfather for Lee. As I mentioned earlier, my dad and Eric spent a couple of summers working at the Hoover plant. And one of the back in the day there, because it was a while ago, they used to have a bakery wagon. It was horse-drawn. It would come by every day, and you could pick up snacks and such off the truck. And the driver, according to my father, was a very profane guy who was always peppering his language with expletives no matter what he was talking about at the time. And when he came to the Hoover plant, he often would leave the truck, or leave the wagon, I should say, momentarily, and he would pop over to the Western Freight across the road, because there was a very attractive woman that worked there, and he liked to go over and chat her up, excuse me. He continued to do this, although he noticed that there were some shortages on his wagon, and he was attributing that to the Hoover plant, but I guess the temptation of across the road was too much, and he kept going over there in spite of that. One day, as my father was talking to him, he mentioned that he wasn't sure if he was going to go across the road to chat up the woman, and my father asked him about this, which was, again, I think part of his role in the heist was to distract him, and the driver said that given the losses that he was having on the truck, he was afraid that he might go over there and come back and his effing horse would be gone. But in spite of these early capers, both of these two good friends went on to live productive, law-abiding lives, and I wanted to stress that. A third person in their sort of core group of friends was Don Wilkinson, who unfortunately, due to some health issues, wasn't able to come today. As I said earlier, I got to know, I've known Eric all my life, but I really spent a lot of time with him because he used to come out on the weekends and help teach my parents how to sail, because unlike Eric, who was an experienced sailor, my parents were not so experienced when they bought a boat, so he jumped in to help. I thought, when we were talking about this the other day to my father, I thought it was great the way he as I say, volunteered to help like this, and my dad, clarified that as much as he was there to help, he also was a guy who loved to be entertained and get a good laugh, and they shared a lot of that together, and usually at the end of the day he'd find a steak at my parents' house with some good liquor, so it was all sort of part of the package. But anyway, one night at the end of a full day of sailing on my parents' boat, Eric, as my father said, was very good about expressing his feelings and acknowledging people. and he stood up and said that he didn't think there'd be any other boat on the lake with 3 guys on it that had been friends for over 150 years. And he really valued their mutual friendship. My father also really wanted to say what a terrific sense of humor Eric had, and what a great friend he had been to him over his life. He also wanted to stress that when the chips were down, no one was a better friend, and if you asked him for help, he was in before you ever had to explain what you needed him to do. He was just in. In closing, when Lee contacted my father to let him know that Eric had passed away, he called Don to let him know as well. Afterwards, he sent him an email which read, "The 3 amigos are no longer. May he rest in peace." Anyway, cheers to Eric.
Cheers to Eric. Cheers.
Thanks, Paul.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks.
We were all a bit anxious for a little bit, but Eric was calm, didn't say anything for a few moments. And then he said, "Perhaps there's someplace out there we can get a book on sailing basics." Eric had been a frequent visitor to Ward's Island in those days when he was courting Dolores, who used to stay over there for the summers with friends. And that's when I got to meet him. We sailed together for 4 years and did manage to learn a few more basics of sailing. When Art and Mike and I purchased a new boat in '68, Eric dropped out of the consortium as he and Dolores were now living in Burlington and starting a family. He still enjoyed sailing, however, and continued sailing with Don and loved going to regattas, especially at the Boulevard Club where he was a member. It was at the Boulevard Club that Dolores arranged a memorable 50th birthday party for Eric. It seemed at the time that we were getting pretty ancient. We also had many happy New Year's celebrations there in the 90s, and I remember Don Milligan and his wife being at a few of those. Eric was a member of the Military Institute, and he loved its history and the formality of special gatherings, especially the roast beef dinners once a month. It was through Eric that many of us enjoyed the ambience of the Institute to celebrate special occasions. Eric loved tradition. He was a keen fan of the old movie channel. When I phoned Eric a while back, he said he was watching the Lawrence Welk show. I said I didn't know they were being aired anymore. That surprised him and I think disappointed him a little bit. It was Eric's calm demeanor and his attention to fashion and protocol that earned him the nickname Admiral, coined by Mike Armour. We'll all miss him. Bon voyage, Admiral.
Bon voyage.
I'll just, I just got one story I wanted to tell about my dad. It was one funny story of actually here at the Argyle and Sutherlands, and myself and my friend Ken and my dad were at a dinner here, and I think it was a dinner for fallen soldiers. So it was kind of they're all steeped in tradition, but it was a pretty serious dinner. And one tradition is they pass around a decanter full of port at the end of the meal, and it's a tradition that goes back 150 years to everybody at the table has to hand the decanter and you must pour it and never ever let it touch the table. And so it's a very serious tradition, and it went on for unbroken for 150 years. And so we were all there, and my dad's chatting. He's like leaning over and chatting to the vet next to him, and it comes to me, and I'm so paranoid that don't pour it in and don't let it touch. And I'm telling Ken, okay, be very, very careful. So Ken takes it, pours it in, hands it to my dad, and my dad's chatting. He goes, "Oh yeah, yeah, okay, thanks." And he plunks it down on the table and continues chatting. That was it. 150 years down right there. So again, cheers to my dad for that.
Cheers, Derek.
And does anybody else have any want to say anything, or should we just continue drinking? You got anything funny, Andy?
Just about fashion and whatnot. I remember I was up and down losing weight, and I had these really nice suits. I spent quite a bit of money on it because Mr. Hillman taught me a lot. He used to take closets when we got a few drinks started on the weekends and whatnot. He said, my pants don't fit, and he turns to me and says, "Suspenders, always the answer." It's little things like that that Mr. Hillman said to me. I still call him Mr. Hillman because he's always Mr. Hillman to me. But it's those little things like that, and you know, a martini before they invented chocolate to put in them, and I enjoyed that. And the breakfast with the little weights to put on the bacon so it wouldn't curl. The closets had not 1 or 20 hats, but there must have been about 80 hats, and the canes and the shoes to match, and the puffs and the ties, and the white silk scarves with the tuxedos. And it's things like that that you know, I remember, and a lot of us do. He was meticulous in his attire, and I just want to say, Mr. Hillman, the memories that we have, we'll never forget. So, Mr. Hillman.
Cheers. Thanks, Andy.
He was that meticulous from a very early age. I can remember I was about, well, not 20 years younger than he was, but almost. And we would go and visit Aunt Marguerite and Uncle Lester, and the boys were, including Bruce, were always out and about with the girls, but Eric, he always looked perfect. I mean, any young girl of our age would just look up to him and drool. Because he was so, I can't remember exactly what you were like, Bruce. He just shone and getting dressed and done up to go out.
He was a natty dresser. I think they would call it a natty dresser.
Natty dresser from the get-go.
You bore his clothes.
You bore his clothes. You'll learn from the best.
Bruce is a wise man.
Speaking of sartorial things, a gang of us have had a Grey Cup party for over 40 years, I think. And at one time we used to show one another's slides, you know, in those days. And we had it at Dolores and Eric's house one time. And Dolores had taken a series of pictures of Eric decked out beside different cars. I don't know if they were all his, but they were pretty fancy. Sometimes she showed one after the other, after the other, after the other, and we were in stitches. And Eric was chuckling away. That's all. That was a funny time.
I remember one time, I have to say this, it was David and Lee. There'd be soiled diapers involved, and there's Mr. Hillman. Dolores wasn't around. His answer was this, it was quite simplistic. He would take the little babies and he'd put them in the bathtub and wait at Dolores. Is that true? Do you remember these stories? You remember that? These are the stories that stick in my head. It's just, you know, as a natty dresser did want them soiled, he'd just put them in the bathtub before Dolores came home. Until Dolores came home, and that was Mr. Hillman.
There was me in the bathtub.
Oh, that was you in the bathtub? It's true. There you go. I wasn't quite sure if it was David or
Remember that?
I do. I was like 16, 17. No, I didn't remember that until Andy got that story out of him, actually.
Yeah, it's true.
With Eric and my brother and father on the boat, and my dad, although he's off meat these days, he used to just love a good steak, and for him it was crazy how much he loved a good steak, and it could almost border on a sexual experience. It was that kind of a highlight. So we had pulled into
Good steak's a good steak.
Good steak's a good steak, that's true. I like a good steak. It's never been quite that for me, but it was very important to my father. And he'd gone, we'd pulled into a harbor, and we'd gone to the grocery store, and he had handpicked an extra fabulous steak, and he was clearly marking it. He wouldn't cook it, but he clearly marked that that was his. And he got another steak for the rest, a couple of steaks for the rest of us, but there was definitely one that was his. And we went and cooked them, and then, you know, gave them over for dinner. And then halfway through the meal, my dad realized that really he didn't think that the steak he had handpicked was in front of him, it was in front of Eric. And we heard about that for the rest of the trip. He was the silent sound that Eric had gotten his steak. It was not a good moment. Not a good moment. But, and your dad rubbed it in, which was perfect, because he was great at that, which was, as I say, good. My dad needed that, so that was very funny.
Yeah, your sister said that my dad was the only one who would tell your dad off. I don't know if that was true.
Yeah, he could do it in a nice way. Yes, yeah, he was good that way, and I think he enjoyed the barbs back and forth, and we loved it. So we could jump in, and then he would help. So that was good, because my dad is very good at giving it out, less good at taking it, but your dad was always there to help. So that was terrific. He really enjoyed it. He was a good guy. Always a dude, and cool.
Yeah.